continue the conversation, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to respond to them. These are just pictures that I have taken over the years about my visits to Mount Athos and elsewhere. I have other pictures that I've taken in other places, but we have time to go through them. Those of you who might heard me in Raleigh, you may have seen these pictures, so I beg your patience, but this audience haven't seen them. And because I've taken this picture, I have some pictures that are better, professionally speaking. I'm not a professional photographer, but these are pictures that I have taken based on the people I've seen and the places that I've been to. So we'll start from there and see where we go. You are familiar with that map, right? And you all know where Mount Athos is. I don't know whether... you have something that points? Oh, no, you don't need to go up there. Really, it doesn't matter. So it's in the northern part of Greece. Let's go to the next one and you see where it is. Very good.
Right here.
Right there, yeah.
You forgot to put Cyprus on here.
Well, Cyprus is on the... We'll get to Cyprus later on. Okay, this is just to give you an idea. This peninsula, the Athonite Peninsula, as many of you know, it's about 30 miles long and 10 miles wide. Since the 9th century, it was reserved there for hermits and monks that were being displaced from the Middle East as Islam was expanding in those regions. Remember, the regions in Egypt, Syria, all the lands in the east was the natural expansion of Christianity. The reason why Christianity went west is mostly accidental, because it was in the east that Christianity was expanding historically through missionaries and so on. So when Islam took over these lands, we see the expansion of Christianity into Europe and elsewhere. Well, there were no monasteries there, of course, in the 7th century, 8th century, 9th century. And the emperor at that time, for better or for worse, reserved the mountain only for men. Now, today it would have been difficult to make it only for men. In fact, Greece has had a problem with the European Union, who are pressing to open the mountain for men and women. The way I respond to that question is this. Thinking sociologically, the way the Holy Mountain developed with that stipulation developed in such a way that if you change it suddenly now, it risks disintegration of the mountain. Just like if you have a boat that you discover sunk in the bottom of the ocean, if you bring it up too suddenly, it will disintegrate. So my hope is that perhaps in the future, the mountain will be open up to women. I am not an elder, I am a sociologist, and I share the frustration of women who cannot go there. Now, the only way that the mountain can be opened up for women is if the Holy Virgin appears to the visions of some elders there and tells them, it's time to open it up for women. Now, I don't know whether Elder Baisios wanted to send a message when he in his will, he wanted to be buried in the women's monastery. So anyway, the way it has been set up at this point is that the European Union made an exception. So they let the monks carry on with their activities. If you ask them that question, they will tell you, we are not misogynists. This is a place for us to come and focus on our spiritual work, and that's the only holy mountain we have. And incidentally, there are more women monasteries in the whole of the Greek nation there than men's monasteries. So it's not as if there are no monasteries for women. That's something to keep in mind. And the monastery survived through the great ingenuity of the monks over the centuries, with all kinds of I mentioned it in my book. Some of you may remember that when the Greek dictatorship wanted to, what are we going to do with Mount Athos, because it was, there was a kind of decline of monks flooding to the mountain, and one politician suggested that maybe we should open it up for tourism and turn some of the monasteries into casinos, perhaps. Well, the elderly monks who were there, they were panicked, and they wrote a letter to Brezhnev, the former secretary of the Soviet Union. And he said the Greek dictatorship is trying to get hold of the Holy Mountain. Russia has stakes on the Holy Mountain because of... And then Brezhnev wrote a letter to the Greek junta and said the Holy Mountain should remain intact because Russia also has cultural claims on the mountain. And they didn't touch it. And that was the beginning of the revival of Mount Athos in the 70s and 80s. Also, the monks, they had a tradition of how to survive in difficult times. When the Turks took Constantinople, and before they took Constantinople, they took Salonika. So a delegation of monks went to Salonika, and they submitted their surrender to the local pasha. They knew that Constantinople was a matter of time, and the Turks would not ransack the monastery if the monastery surrendered voluntarily. And that's how they prevented the destruction up there. And then when the Germans were coming to Greece in the 40s, again the monks were concerned about the Holy Mountain, and they drafted a letter to the Führer. And they asked the devil himself to be a protector of the Holy Mountain. And the Führer was so flattered that he gave an order to his troops not to bother the Holy Mountain. So the Holy Mountain was rescued. So there is this tradition of diplomacy that the monks exercised. And it goes all the way back to the time of St. Catherine in the desert at Sinai. When I visited the monastery a couple of years ago, the Monastery of St. Catherine, I found out one of the things that we were shown was the Achtinameh. I don't know if anybody has heard that term. The Achtinameh of Mohammed. Presumably Mohammed gave an order, and because Mohammed was illiterate, he could not sign it, so he put his hand, and it says that the monastery should not be attacked by Muslim warriors. And they left it remained intact. So Muslims and Christians carry on a kind of a symbiotic life in the monastery. The monks there told me that if it wasn't for the Muslim Bedouins, we wouldn't be able to exist here. They provide security for the monastery, they cultivate the lands, they do all sorts of things. And for them, it's their livelihood too. At the same time, they have a consciousness that they have Greek roots, because when the monastery was built up by Justinian in the 4th century, he brought there something like 200 Christian families to be guards of the monastery. Those individuals, when Islam developed in that peninsula, became Muslim, but they never remember their memory of St. Catherine. And in fact, they honor St. Catherine, they go and pray in the church. And the monks, the monastery created a little mosque inside the yard of the monastery for the Bedouins, who are the protector of the monastery. That's another story, but all right, let's move on. This is the peninsula, and you can see the monasteries all over. It's a very rugged mountain. You won't find any decent harbor for boats. And I suspect that that's one of the reasons why it was chosen as a hermitage, as a place for hermits, because it was difficult for pirates to anchor and ransack the monasteries. I was on a sailing trip with a friend of ours who had a boat, and right at the tip, sudden winds picked up, and we really didn't know what to do. We couldn't find a harbor to go and hide ourselves. Finally, because he's a terrific sailor, he found a little cove, and we just managed to go over the night. As we were going around the peninsula, at the top of the mountain, we saw a little nephos, or a cloud, just like a halo. And I said to my friend, "You see that? That's the Holy Virgin that protected us." And then he looked at me and he said, he gave me a materialistic interpretation. He said, "It's the moisture that came from the..." All right. Yeah, the only way to get there is on a boat. Next. That is, it was during March, and you can see the snows up there. That's the tip of the mountain. Even if there are no snows there, there is pure white marble. And according to tradition, a Greek sculptor went to Alexander and suggested to him that he can build his statue right at the top of Mount Athos. And Alexander, which is unlike himself, who was such a Narcissus, he said, "No, let's not ruin the mountain." And he said, "Another king has damaged the peninsula," and that's when Xerxes cut a piece at the beginning of Mount Athos there to carry his boat from one side of the Aegean to the other, because before he got ransacked at the tip of the mountain. All right, let's move on. All right, that's a monastery that appears, it's like a castle. Let's move on to the next one. This is the Monastery of St. Panteleimon. It's a Russian monastery at the beginning of Mount Athos. And that's the monastery that began his career of Saint Silouan the Athonite. You may have read the book Saint Silouan the Athonite by Elder Sophroni. I strongly recommend that book. One thing that comes to my mind, something that Saint Silouan said. And he said, let's assume that all the Bibles were destroyed in an earthquake. Does that mean that the Bible is lost? He said, no. Because the Bible, he said, is written in the heart of every saint. And when conditions will be ripe again, the Bible could be written again. You couldn't get more mystical than that. One of the attractions of Orthodoxy is this mystical tradition. I was asked, how come in the universities you find only Buddhism, Hinduism, even Sufism, and lectures on Taoism and so on? Why? Because these traditions are clearly more mystical than the way Christianity appears today. And therefore, I think if Christianity is presented in a way that St. Gregory Palamas understood, it can win the university. It can win the university because of this mystical experiential tradition. Many intellectuals in the West, some poets like Yeats and T.S. Eliot and others, who were fed up with the extreme rationalization of the West, they turned towards the East. They went to Hinduism and Buddhism and the Himalayas because they thought that that's where you can find an experiential path to the divine, as an escape from what Max Weber, the sociology, calls the disenchantment of the West. And he claimed that the East remained an enchanted garden, meaning more mystical, more otherworldly. Well, Mount Athos represents the East that is in the West. And therefore, if people get to know the tradition, they may not have to go all the way to the Himalayas and to Hinduism. So this is how I speak to academic audiences when I find myself in that setting. Not to appear as if I'm trying to proselytize them, but speaking in terms of the basic characteristics of the Orthodox tradition as it has survived over the centuries. At the same time, I don't want to give the impression that everybody on Mount Athos is a holy man and that the monks are perfect. They are human beings with flaws. Even saints are not perfect and they make mistakes. And I think that's a very important lesson because people think that a saint or a monk is absolutely perfect. And if they see some imperfection, they lose heart and they move away. So one has to use discernment about these things. So it's the same monastery that Elder Sophroni began his career. How many of you have heard of Elder Sophroni? Okay. His books are very philosophical. I remember when I first went to Mount Athos at the Vadomedi Monastery, and the elder there was Elder Joseph, the disciple of Elder Joseph the Hesychast. And he has in front of him the Greek translation of, before the book was published, we shall see him as he is. In Greek is said, oψόμεθα τον Θεόν καθώς εστί. So he was reading it and he was telling us that this is the best patristic text that he has ever read, that has ever been published ever since the early fathers of the church. We shall see him as he is. That's the English translation. A hermitage. I always wonder how could somebody live in a place like this for 40, 50 years without really any human connection. What is the individual doing there? My suspicion is that they are not there. I mean their body is there. Their body is there, but they are not there in terms of their consciousness. They are somewhere else. Otherwise, anybody who would do that, isolated for so many decades, can go literally crazy. This is the difference between a hermit who spends his life praying and a hermit who is in the woods, like the Unabomber. They call him a hermit, and it gives a very bad name to hermits. I showed this picture to some friends when I first took them. I said, doesn't that remind you of Tibet? And the answer was no, that reminds me of Alcatraz. That is the monastery of Vadobedi. That's where St. Gregory Palamas spent his monastic career on Mount Athos before he became Bishop of Salonika in the 14th century. And that's the place where I first met Father Maximus, at the gate of the monastery. And his great hero is St. Gregory Palamas. So when he was at the monastery in Cyprus that I call the Panagia Monastery, he built a whole chapel in honor of St. Gregory Palamas. It was the first church on the island in honor of St. Gregory. The picture somehow is, that's the person that I call Andonis in my books. He's the one who said to me, if you want to meet saints, come with me to Mount Athos. And I call him my godfather in Orthodoxy, because he helped me get reconverted into my own cradle tradition. Next. All right, that's the Holy Virgin. You may have seen that picture before. She's the only woman who can walk on Mount Athos. And there are icons in every monastery with all kinds of stories about miracles. There is no monastery that doesn't have a miraculous icon. And the news that goes around in the monastery is what kind of miracle were committed by what kind of icon. So one of the things that I gave a talk once and I said, Orthodoxy has three basic characteristics. It is a miracle tradition, a healing tradition, and a miracle tradition. All three of them. So it was during the debates, and then I said, 1, 2, I forgot the third, and I said, oops. You don't remember, we have a short memory, huh? Okay, so the Holy Virgin, there is a whole story about how the Holy Virgin ended up on Mount Athos. according to the mythology, if you will, or the story, she embarked on a journey to Cyprus to meet Lazarus. Lazarus is buried in Larnaca, and there is a church that was built by a Russian prince. And according to tradition, that's where Lazarus left after he was resurrected by Jesus, and to get away from his persecutors, he came to the island, eventually became a bishop there, and that's where he's buried. So the Holy Virgin with John the Evangelist embarked on a journey to Cyprus, and because of a hurricane or whatever, they ended up on Mount Athos. Now, how can one from Cyprus go to Mount Athos is beyond me, but that's according to the tradition. And then when she stepped on Mount Athos, she was so enchanted, and she said, "This is my garden. I will ask my son to give it to me as a gift." And ever since that time, the Holy Virgin is the only one who can be on Mount Athos. There are all kinds of stories about miraculous manifestations of the Holy Virgin and John the Evangelist. In fact, Father Maximus was saying that Elder Paisios told him that they visited him one time in his hermitage and gave him all kinds of discussions about theology. Well, the difference in this picture is that the Holy Virgin is not holding baby Jesus. It's an unusual painting. Right. You all know that monastery, right? How many of you have been there? 1, 2, 3. That's the monastery of Simonopetra, right? And the story, according to Simonopetra, was that there was a hermit in a cave there, and then the Holy Virgin appeared in front of him and said, "Simon, I want you to build a monastery on that rock." And he was taken aback and he said, "How am I going to build a monastery on that rock? I don't have the means." And he said, "You start it and I will help you." And this is how the monastery was set up there. It is 9 floors high. It's an area where there is a lot of earthquakes, but it remained intact. It only had one fire once. But the Greek government sent engineers, when I took that picture, to reinforce the rock so that it doesn't collapse in case there is an earthquake. Well, that's where you'll find, I met a Father Athanasios there who was, I'll show you his picture, and his father is a monk at that monastery, and his mother was a nun at one of the monasteries outside of Mount Athos, and the daughter is the abbess of the monastery. The mother is the nun, the abbess is the... So the whole family went... it's hard to imagine how this happened. I went to the monastery in Essex once, and I met an Englishman, a monk, who, with blonde beard, and he was telling me that his wife became a nun in another monastery. Here, they both decided to go and become monastics. And he said, sometimes when we meet, she still thinks she's my wife, and she's trying to correct my collar, she said. Anyway, so we were coming from the sea, coming up. Next. We're walking up with my companion. It took us about 2.5 hours to climb up, back and forth. And I was looking at those balconies, and I was awestruck. And next. So you can see as we come closer. I said to myself, I hope I won't have to walk on those balconies. Next. There it is. And the reason that I had to take this picture that way is because that was the only way to go to the bathroom. So I asked a father, do you fix these balconies here? And he said, when they break, we fix them. Next. Okay. That's the Monastery of Riu. We were walking from one part of the island, of the peninsula to another. I'll show you those paths. Who do you think is one of the patrons of the mountain? Somebody who is also concerned about the paths of Mount Athos to make sure that they are preserved. Because a lot of pilgrims today who are in a hurry, they will jump on one of the tracks there and go to the monastery, so the paths are deteriorating. Prince Charles is a frequent visitor to the Holy Mountain. In fact, he goes there every summer and spends about a week, and gave money, and they built a little chapel outside of one of the monasteries. It was supposed to be a secret, and I wasn't supposed to talk about it, but after I've read it in the newspaper, then I said, okay, I can talk about it. So, and I was told, well, maybe I shouldn't say that he was telling the abbot that he has Orthodox roots, and he admired Orthodoxy because it preserved the tradition from ancient times. So here is this man who may eventually be the head of the Church of England if he becomes king. Now, the one before, this is the Last Supper at a wall painting. That was at the Vadobedi Monastery. I asked permission and I took this picture. It was painted by a very famous Byzantine artist by the name of Panselinos. And notice that they are sitting around, unlike Da Vinci that put them on a table like this, right? And then Mel Brooks made fun of it in his History of the World Part 2, you remember? Next. That's at the Monastery of Dionysiou, wall paintings, a series of them. And according to the monk who was hosting us, he said this is a kind of a prophetic vision about the apocalypse. Bombs are falling, skies are falling, people are in caves, buildings are blown. Am I obstructing your view? No? Okay. Next. Peter and Paul. I found that in an abandoned skiddy. No roof there. There were some mules walking around, and it was a wall painting of Peter and Paul. See how much they love each other, and they do. But during their life, they had their disputes. What was one dispute that made a huge big difference in the development of Christianity? Kosher and circumcision. That was the most important, I think. In other words, if the early apostles saw the way, as they called it, as a kind of a revitalization of Judaism. They were not thinking in terms of starting a new religion. And they thought that if you want to be a Christian, you had to go through Jewish rituals and kosher. And then Paul comes in with his worldly experience. He was Jewish, he was Greek by culture, and he was Roman by citizenship, so he was able to do the things he did because of these three. And he persuaded Peter that we should not require circumcision to become. In other words, you don't have to become a Jew to become a Christian. And incidentally, this is what made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire and not Judaism. Because at that time, the gods of Olympus were declining in appeal, and many intellectuals, and they were looking for monotheism, and one of the attractions was Judaism. But because of kosher issues, they went to the Christians, because it was the same tradition in a way, and many of the early Christians were Jews. We don't know that, but Paul went to Jewish communities in the whole Mediterranean, and they were his first converts. Okay. Right. Next, another. This is a candlestick, pure silver, that was a gift to this monastery from the people of Moscow. It was not under the order of Lenin, of course. It was Muscovites before the revolution. So they would bring it out during Holy Week, and you can see how tall it is. It was an impressive little... there are incredible treasures on Mount Athos, because it's a place where emperors used to give lavishly, and I heard a story of King Paul when Greece still had a king, and when he went there and the monks showed him the kind of treasures, he came out dizzy with what he saw there. Of course, they are not for sale, and they are not worth a dime, as it were. But in terms of their treasure, if they were willing to sell things there, they could fix it. One art dealer told the abbot of one of the monasteries that if he was willing to sell one of the artifacts there, they could fix all the monasteries of Mount Athos. Of course, it was not for sale. You know what that is, calling for prayers. Next. Okay, this is part, we were moving from one monastery to another. The man in front is my friend and companion, I call him Lavros. He's the one who I had to wait in Salonika before we went to Mount Athos together. Next. The paths. Next. This is the monastery of Grigoriou. Oh, sorry, Dionysiou. There are all kinds of miraculous stories. Saint Dionysius came to the monastery as an unknown muleteer. He, as a simple monk. In reality, he was the Patriarch of Constantinople. Was it Dionysius? I may confuse the names. It may be Niphon. Anyway, one of the patriarchs of Constantinople was dethroned, and he came as a simple monk to the monastery. So an angel came to a vision of the abbot, and he said to him, "How do you treat my patriarch like this?" And he said, "What patriarch?" And he mentioned his name. So what he was doing was simply carrying foodstuffs on mules. So when that vision appeared to the abbot, the next time that this saint, I may confuse the names, they waited for him with candles and chants at the entrance of the monastery, and they made him their elder when they realized who he was. You know that picture, right? Elder Joseph the Hesychast. He is the one who is credited with the revival of Mount Athos. During the 50s, he gathered around him some young monks. One of them was Elder Joseph, who eventually took over Vatopedi, and Ephraim of Arizona, and Ephraim of Katunakia. I'll show you their pictures. And other elderly monks were saying, "What are you going to do with these youngsters?" They were teasing him. He said, "These youngsters are going to bring life on Mount Athos." And that's exactly what happened. So Father Maximos and other young monks are the spiritual children of these youngsters that Elder Joseph the Hesychast. And now Father Maximos is creating a new plot of group of monks who will carry the tradition. So here is his hermitage. Again, how do these people live in this? I visited the monastery of St. Athanasius at the tip of the monastery, and I had to look towards the rock because as I was coming down, there was chaos on the left, and I am not good at heights. So we were told to just focus our eyes on the rock, and that's how we ended up down there. Next. This is the girdle of the Holy Virgin. And according to tradition, when women come in contact with it, they conceive. If they want children and they cannot have children. So periodically they take this encased relic outside of the monastery to various parts of Greece. And according to tradition, women conceive. When I was there, when I first saw it, being an academic skeptic, I asked the monk, and he gave us a whole story of how this arrived at the monastery. And at that time I thought, my God, this will make a fantastic story for a film like Riders of the Lost Ark, the Riders of the Lost Girdle. So when I asked him, what evidence do you have that this is the girdle of the Holy Virgin? And then my friend Andonis said, you don't ask questions like that here. For 2,000 years they thought this is the girdle of the Holy Virgin. It is the girdle of the Holy Virgin. I said, I understand. And so even if it is not, I think the Holy Virgin blessed it, so it does what she would have done. All right. Skulls of saints. Guess who is the middle one? From the right. The second to the right. St. John Chrysostom. And you'll see that there is a little opening there. That's the ear of St. John Chrysostom. And the explanation why the ear is still intact is that that's the ear through which St. Paul whispered the liturgy to St. Chrysostom. It's a magnificent spiritual mythology. I call it mythology not to degrade it. I think mythologies have power and truth in them. Mythology in the sense that it's a story. And it's a story that helps people reconnect with God. So let's not look at mythology as something that is not true. A mythology can be more true than an actual fact. You understand that? You shake your head. In the same way that we cannot explain what happened before the Big Bang, the only way to approach it is mythologically. Okay, next. I went up at the tower to see if there are any pirate ships coming. They always had somebody at the top to make sure that the monastery was. And when pirates would come, they would get inside, shut the doors. That's why they have a tradition after sunset, the doors are closed. So you have to be at the monastery before sunset. And if pirates would come and they try to climb up, they used to defend themselves by pouring olive oil on them, hot olive oil. All right. Fixing the monasteries, the European Union sent money there to fix the monastery, but they got it indirectly. There is a tradition on Mount Athos that I don't particularly like myself, but it's there. You find it periodically in the minds of some monks there. A kind of an anti-Western kind of sentiment that goes all the way back to the Crusades. Yes, the Crusaders did horrible things, and there is good reason to have these memories, but I find it a little bit unnecessary because somebody who comes from the West to hear that, they may be turned off, even though if they allow themselves to go any further, they will discover the spiritual jewels there. I don't know, some of you may have seen that as you've been there. There is a kind of a not real understanding of what goes on in the West. One of the people that I have a thorough understanding, mutual understanding, is with Elder Gallistos Ware. I have this interview in Gifts of the Desert with him, And because Kallistos is a convert to Christianity, a Greek Orthodox bishop, he has an understanding of East and West like no one that I have met on that level. And he played an extremely important role, as you know, in making Eastern Orthodoxy accessible to Western readers and believers. Right, next. That's the monk at Simonopetra, where his son is there and his wife is a monastery, I think, at Ormilia, and the daughter is the abbess. This is the icon of the Holy Virgin, and it's considered to be miraculous. The monastery was ransacked by pirates. Most of the monks, all the monks were killed except one 15-year-old who managed to leave, escape, took this icon and threw it into a well, and eventually ended up on Crete. And after something like 70 years, he went back to the monastery and he told them what happened. And there was, he revealed where the secret well was. They found it, and they found the icon floating at the top, according to what they say, and a candle, a lighted candle on top. So they have a lot of litanies and a lot of healing phenomena took place that they attribute to this icon. So each monastery, as I said, has icons that are given credit for all kinds of miracles. Like, for example, the olive oil disappeared from the monastery, and because of high winds and winter conditions, they could not have provisions of olive oil, and the monks didn't know how to do their rituals because olive oil is fundamental. And overnight, their cellar was filled up with olive oil, and they considered it a kind of a miracle. And this, by the way, is something that I was told by scientists at the monastery of Simonopetra. The abbot was a former professor of engineering. Thank you very much. And the one who was for hospitality was a former professor of biology in some American university. I got the feeling that before they could accept you as a monk on Simonopetra, you had to have a doctoral degree. And it was very multicultural. And these people were telling me that they have witnessed miracles like the ones I just described. So I haven't seen it myself, but these are individuals who have some credibility being scientists who can differentiate between something that can be explained materially and something that cannot. All right? Trapeza. At that time, yeah, that's okay. At Trapeza, we were more pilgrims at that Trapeza than the monks themselves. Here is what is happening on Mount Athos. The tradition of hospitality was set up at a time where very few pilgrims would go there. Now, everybody wants to go there. Therefore, it has become both a logistical problem and a financial burden on the monasteries. But they don't want to give up the tradition of open hospitality. However, you cannot stay there indefinitely. They have rules now that did not exist before, such as you can spend there only 4 nights and in 4 different monasteries. And you have to reserve a position because the monastery can cope with so many visitors at a time, and therefore they cannot accommodate more people than they have beds for. So they want to preserve the tradition, and as a result, the tradition of open hospitality, but at the same time now they are forced to act like hotels in the sense that you have to make reservations. Of course, if you have a special permit because either you are a scholar or you are planning to stay on Mount Athos or you want to consider being a novice, they give you a different permit to stay. But if you just go there for a visit, you can go only for 4 days in 4 different monasteries. Okay, that's the icon. Pilgrims would take turn because it's considered to be a blessing. Next. Holy water. When my turn came to bring that water, that was my first visit there. The abbot, who found out who I was and that I was a sociologist and so on, and he said, "Drink, Kyriakos, drink. Maybe the Holy Spirit will enlighten your mind." At that time, I had no intention or no plan on writing a book about Orthodoxy. In fact, when Houston Smith came to our university, you know who Houston Smith is? He is a professor of philosophy at MIT. He is retired now. The man is in his 90s. And he wrote the classic book on the world's religions. It's a fantastic book in terms of understanding the world's religions. And he came to our university one time, and he gave a talk. And then I had the pleasure of meeting him and having dinner with him. So I said to him, I've read your book, it's a terrific book, but your treatment of Eastern Orthodoxy needs development. It's not very well developed. Everything else is brilliant, but I think you are talking about Christianity and you divide it into Protestantism, Catholicism, and Eastern Orthodoxy. But the section on Eastern Orthodoxy is undeveloped. And you know what he said to me? At that time, I was not planning on going to Mount Athos. He said, "You do that." So I smiled and I didn't make any response, but there you go. Anyway, holy water. Are you familiar with the work of a Japanese scientist by the name of Emoto? How many? I've met this Japanese scientist. I've met him. I've been at the lectures that he gave. What he did was to ask people, that was the experimental group, to send loving thoughts over a bucket of water. And the control water from the same was kept separately. I think he asked others to send very aggressive thoughts on the other water. And then he froze the 2 waters. The one water was being prayed over, sent loving thoughts, the other the opposite. And then he froze the water and took pictures of the crystals. And what do you think he found? And he gave a whole several lectures. He's doing that. He published a couple of books on the subject. He found out that the water that was being prayed over, the crystals were magnificently beautiful. The others were dull and uninteresting. And it was from the same water. Why am I saying this? Because some people in some experiments that they've done in physics, again, we bring science back, show that in fact our thoughts affect the behavior on the subatomic level. Which means that the kind of thoughts that we generate affect not only the spiritual real, but also the physical real. Which means that holy water is based on some scientific principles, not just faith. Right? Remember when we said in the morning that I believe that the 21st century will be the time of the integration of religion and science, something that Sorokin was advocating in the 50s and 60s. I think, who knows, maybe it's happening. And that's where I think Orthodoxy can play an important role. Yes?
There was, on the internet last week, there was a story about a section of highway that was blessed with holy water, and atheists came with unholy water and tried to reverse the process.
Is that right?
They had a big container, like it looked like waste material, and it said unholy water.
Unholy water. They want to make their point. Yes, ma'am?
I formerly worked in the hospital world, and I remember reading a story where there were 2 control groups patients who did not know they were being prayed for, versus a third one, patients who were not prayed for at all. And the ones that were prayed for did significantly better on their outcome. The ones who did not know they were being prayed for was more than a statistical advantage, and the ones who were not prayed for were remarkably low. So there's a lot of scientific evidence.
Yes, yeah. This is, of course, it generates all kinds of controversy from the opposing camp, but it is something that is happening. In fact, Larry Dossi, the medical researcher and doctor, claims that if doctors do not pray for their patients, they are depriving their patients of real medicine. And he developed the concept of the non-locality of mind. By non-locality of mind, it means that we as human beings and our minds is not confined within our skull. So our brain is a vehicle of the mind and not the mind itself. A reductionistic understanding of the brain is the way they have it at MIT. At MIT, somebody told me outside of the psychology department there is some kind of a motto that says we are committed to the study of the mind through the study of the brain. In other words, there is nothing outside of the brain. And Winfield Penfield, the famous brain researcher, he died now. He was an atheist all his life. Towards the end of his life, he discovered in his experiments that the mind is not confined within the brain. And that changed his whole outlook on the world. So that's why when I hear people like Dawkins making the statements that they do, they don't know what they're talking about. Who had a hand? Yes?
Yes,
I'll
I've heard about a study recently where they involved music, and they had a gentleman holding a banana in one hand, and then the person would play music, and he would also try to push, try not to move that hand, try not to move that hand. And when they played classical or relaxing music, the hands, stayed. But when they put rap music on that involved the bass and all, his energy completely snapped, and he could not even.
So there are different energetic frequencies.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, that's why the chants we do in church have therapeutic effect on the mind-body. And there are also researchers showing that going to church is not just good for your spirit, it's also good for your body. They've done research on that subject. Yes?
I think it's, as our responsibility of Christians, I think it's our responsibility to pray for our doctors, because they don't necessarily pray for us. Pray for them so that they can do the work. Otherwise they can't.
We should pray for everybody, of course. All right. Okay, litanies are all over the frequent on Mount Athos. Yes, let's move on a little bit further. That's a cathedral in the middle of Mount Athos, abandoned. It was St. Andrews.
Yeah, there's 4 or 5 months in
There are now from.
there. I visited
Oh, great. Okay, are they fixing it?
as best I can.
Because the last Tsar started building that, and then as a result of the revolution was left unfinished. So I think it's one of the monasteries that is in charge of it.
American, a Greek, Brit. It's a very international group that it's all young group.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Next. Okay, let's move on now. This impresses non-Orthodox when they see that there is this kind of a beautiful iconostasy. Next. I don't have to explain to you that. Now that's Father Athanasios, the son of that elderly monk at Simonopetra. So he is in charge of the bookstore, or not the bookstore, the library. So these monasteries have a lot of manuscripts that throughout the ages, various elders who kept a journal or whatever. So there are universities now that are putting them on online for future research. We don't know what they will discover there. Yeah, that's Elder Ephraim of Vadopedi. I won't say. He was one of the one of the monks that were disciples of Elder Joseph. Next. That's the artifact that the monk, one German art dealer told him that if you are willing to sell that, you can make enough money to fix all the monasteries on Mount Athos. Next. All right, next. So studying is very important in spiritual practice. Particularly, not only the study of the Bible, but also the life of saints, because the saints provide a model of what we may be. Here is a difference between Protestantism and the Orthodox and Catholic tradition. The Protestants eliminated the category of the saint, so there is no way of knowing who is a Christified individual, because the saints are those who embody the principles of Christianity, and they provide an example of what we may be. When Protestantism declared sola scriptura, meaning only the scriptures, you take the scriptures literally, and if you see a contradiction, then you throw the scripture out of the window. This is what happened to a lot of Protestants who are socialized to believe in sola scriptura, and then when they realize that there are contradictions in the New Testament, say, how could God make these contradictions? It means that the Bible is false, and then they become agnostic. This is what happened to Bert Ehrman. Does anybody know who I'm talking about? You know? Yeah, he grew up in a fundamentalist Protestant family. He went to a fundamentalist school. He was bright. He got a scholarship and went to Princeton. And he decided to focus on the Bible. And there he discovers that the Bible has certain contradictions, and therefore, how could this be? If God is God, God does not make contradictions. And he became an agnostic. And he is considered to be one of the leading Bible scholars. We don't have this problem. Why don't we have this problem? Because the way I understand it, we have all, the foundation of our faith is not just the scriptures, but also the life of saints, particularly saints that we have met. You see how these people live their lives, and they embody the teachings of the gospel. Therefore, now when I make these divisions between Christianity, Protestantism, and Orthodoxy, when I am in an open audience, I go out of my way to point out that each of the denominations, or each of the divisions, has contributed to modern civilization. Like Catholicism preserved Western Europe during the Dark Ages and set the seeds of the scientific revolution. Protestantism gave us modern democracy, at least the early Protestant, with its emphasis on individualism and the rights of the abolition of slavery. But Orthodoxy, I said, preserved the experiential pathways to God, because it preserved the mystical tradition of Christianity more so than other Christian traditions. And as I was talking to the Catholic bishop of Portland, and we were talking about this. He said to me, you know, Christianity has two lungs, the Western lung, which is rational, and the Eastern lung, which is mystical and experiential. Both of these lungs are needed for proper breathing. So we have the rational within the spiritual tradition of Orthodoxy, but I think the mystical aspect of it is very pronounced, because the whole idea is not to believe in God, but to taste God. Belief is just one step. It's not the end goal. So the sola scriptura story is something that has really scandalized a lot of people as this kind of so who saw the resurrection first? Was the women or somebody else? All of this minor stuff that they take it, well, if God is fully expressed without any contradiction in the gospel, then God does not exist once you find contradictions. One of the problems with Islam that somebody Dimitris mentioned, asked me the question, is that the die-hard Muslims believe that the Quran is the literal word of God, and therefore that is the book that has to be established over the rest of the world. And this is a source of our problem. All right, reading then. Fishing. We are not vegans on Mount Athos. You eat fish, you eat... let me tell you, at Grigoriou one time when it was Holy Week, and we arrived there on Saturday. And on Saturday you can eat shellfish, right? I've never tasted a better meal of shrimp and all kinds of... And also, on top of that, ice cream, vanilla ice cream with chocolate on top of it. I said, this kind of diet is good enough for me. And then I found out, of course, that the ice cream was made of soya. So I suspect that the fathers who set up these rules, had they known, they would have revised the rules today. Gardening. My wife is interested in permaculture, and she's fascinated with what she sees at the monasteries, that in fact, that's what they are practicing, creating all these layers. And all right. Icon painting. You can buy icons. Now this is Father Maximus during my, when I first met him, and he's taking us to Elder Paisios, to meet Elder Paisios. There he is. We're coming close there. Next. That's Elder Paisios. I didn't take that picture. I was told not to take a picture, and I obeyed. What I did not obey was not to ask him, how does he do those healings? All right. I took it from somebody. So somebody disobeyed and took these pictures. That's why we have them. All right. He spent 2 years in the desert in the Arabian Peninsula, and he survived by cutting crosses and icons and giving them to the Bedouins that would give him a little bit of food. And it was near a spring that hardly had any water in it. After 2 years, he decided to go to Mount Athos in search of an elder himself. And he met the Russian elder, forgot the name, who became his mentor. And that's how he became Paisios. This is Elder Dionysios, a Romanian, who we went to see him. I was at a different journey to Mount Athos. And that was a time when the Pope asked forgiveness from the Orthodox, the late Pope. So we brought the news to him. So he was so excited, he went outside and he spread his hand out and said, "This is the best news I have ever heard in my life." And then a young monk said to him, "We have to see works, not just words." And then the elder says to him, "Look, he asked for forgiveness, whoever asks for forgiveness, we have to give it freely." no questions asked. Anyway, there he is. That's my companion. And Elder Dionysios was training some Romanian monks who were planning to go back to Romania and start their own monasteries. He died 2 or 3 years ago, I think, at the 96. That's some of the transportation on Mount Athos. This is what is bothering some people who say that people don't use the paths and therefore they are deteriorating. Next. The experience of Mount Athos is to walk from one monastery to the other. But if you have only 4 days there, you don't have that much time for walking. Next. That's Elder Porphyrios. And I have written in the Mountain of Silence all kinds of stories about him, so I won't repeat them here. Next. This is Elder Sophroni on the left. Left, that meaning that one. And that's one of the young monks. He was 96 at this picture. My friend Stephanos had an interesting experience with Elder Sophroni. He went to see him with his wife. And he said, we went into the room and he kept staring at me. And he said to him, po, you know the Greek expression. He said, how did you end up with the Sufis, the Buddhists, the Hindus? We've been all over the place, he said to him. He never said anything to him, but my friend really went through all these other schools, and he saw it on wherever he saw it. And he said, come here and put your hand on my heart here. So my friend did that, and he put his hand and started giving a prayer. And then he told him, when you go back to Cyprus, I would like you to find someone who will spread the teachings of Saint Silouan. And he said, I didn't know anyone that could do that. So I went back to Cyprus, and that's the time when Father Maximus came to the island. And then when he met him, he said, you are the one who should be doing this. And Father Maximus at first said, no, I am not giving speeches. He said, no, but you have to. Well, he said, if you sit next to me, I will start with a small group. The small group became 5, 6, 10, eventually 1,000, 2,000. And now his talks are all over the Greek-speaking world internationally. So Elder Sophroni had this charisma of, how do we call it in Orthodoxy? Enorasis. I think that's the word. And I have heard this many times, how elders can look at you and you don't have to do any confessing because they read you like an open book. So they can tell you your sin before you even utter them. That's his monastery in England. If you ever go to London, you may want to visit this monastery. It's really unusual. Do you know the story how the monastery was created there? Elder Sophroni, after 20 years on Mount Athos, left Mount Athos and went with a couple of monks to England. But the British would not give them a visa to enter. Because in the committee to discuss whether they would give them visa, I said, what would 3 monks do to the British economy to let them come in? And then one stood up and he said, what if Jesus came with his 12 disciples? Would we give him an entrance visa? That won the day, and they got visa. Now, Elder Sophroni, as a young man, went to Paris, and he made a living as a painter. He was an artist. For 8 years, he was into Hindu practice and meditation, and then went to Mount Athos, became a monk, eventually ending up in England. They roamed around the countryside in England, and somewhere in Essex, they heard bells ringing. And that was a sign that somehow that's where they will build the monastery. Eventually, the queen gave them an old abandoned church. They built this, and they started the monastery. Now, it's an unusual monastery because you will find men and women, monks and nuns living in the same monastery separately, but they eat together and they pray together. The only monastery in the Orthodox world. One of the reasons that I was told is that this innovation was made by Elder Sophroni, who was considered to be a living saint. And being a living saint, it means that he got instruction from above, and therefore it was accepted. I heard another story, I don't know how true it is, but when one of his old girlfriends found out that he was a monk in England, from Paris, he went there to visit him, and he said to her, "You cannot stay here, I am a monk." And he said, "Then I will become a nun." And she became a nun, and that's how the monastery was created. Next. Okay, that's where Father Maximus was the abbot. That's where I went there during one of my sabbaticals, and I ended up volunteering to be his chauffeur. Of course, I had ulterior motives. Not only I wanted to be with him and also to contribute a little bit to the economy of the monastery, but by being with him, I can get more information about Orthodoxy. He doesn't know how to drive, so somebody has to drive him around. So when I went there, I said, well, now what do I do? How do I get close to him? He was so busy doing things, and he had to travel all over the island. And then it dawned on me that it would be great if I was his chauffeur. And he accepted it, and I was delighted. So every time we'll get into the car, I'll put the tape recorder on the dashboard. And that's why I gather much of the material in the Mountain of Silence. All right, let's move on there. See, he's getting weight on the right. That's the Monastery of the Cross. According to tradition, it was set up by St. Helena in the 4th century. Next. The monastery, the monk on the right succeeded Father Maximus in this monastery. Unfortunately, he had a tragic ending. He died in a helicopter accident on Mount Athos, from all places. And that was it was during that accident that happened. The Patriarch of Alexandria was in the helicopter. They were going to Mount Athos and it crashed.
What was his name?
Arsenios. That's Father Maximus, while he was still the abbot of the monastery in Cyprus, and at the outside of the cave of the Apocalypse on the island of Patmos. That's my friend Stephanos, and he and Father Maximus. Next. All right, we go to the next bunch of. Any questions? Yes.
What is the name of the monastery in London?
The monastery of St. John the Baptist in Essex. You can Google it and find the information, I'm sure. Yes?
What were those long things they were carrying at the very beginning of some of the pictures that they were going to mass or going to church?
The wood.
Oh, what is it?
They were knocking at the. It's called the Simandron, but they hit it rhythmically.
They hit the door? You know?
The wood.
Produces a sound.
Yeah. It goes.
So they don't have bells, they use wood.
Yeah. That tradition, they do have bells, but this tradition, I was told, had started during the Ottoman occupation, where they didn't want them to ring bells. All right, this is Father Maximus today. It's not his real name, but I gave a promise not to reveal his true name publicly. All right. we went to an elementary school with kids. That's the two Ephraims. One on the right is Ephraim of Arizona, and the other one is Katunakia. I have a story about a friend both in the Mountain of Silence, who had a tormenting elder. That's the one. And also in the river, there is a story about how Father Maximus first met him and how he felt about it. One time, Father Maximus, the first visit to Mount Athos, he didn't have a very good experience. He said, I went to one of the monasteries, I think it was Dionysiou, and it was dark, he said. The monks were just moving like shadows. I saw one in front of the icon of the Holy Virgin, and I said to myself, my God, this is the land of the dead. That's the thought that came to my mind. And then the monk that was praying in front of the icon, he came to me and whispered in my ear, and he said, the people that you see around are the true living. It's outside that people are dead. That really shocked him. Next. Yeah, that's one of the Ephraims. Next. All right, that's, the controversial monastery in Arizona, the founding place. There is a long story about this. I don't know if we do have the time to tell it. But very shortly, let me tell you two parallel stories. One was when I got a call from somebody from Texas, introducing himself as a multi-millionaire. He said, you wrote about my other books, but I have a story to tell you. I had an accident, he said, and I lost my memory. So the Greek priest of San Antonio, they were friends, but this guy was not Orthodox at the time. So he said to his friend, why don't you come to me to Mount Athos? We'll go there to pray. In the meantime, he said, I couldn't do simple arithmetic, even though I had a master's degree in mathematics. And he made a lot of money through real estate. He got a master's degree in business, he told me. And he became very wealthy. So he went with his friend to Mount Athos. They were walking from one monastery to another. They saw a hermit trying to dig the ground to plant some vegetables. He felt sorry for him, so he wanted to give him some money. The hermit refused. My friend, he said to me, he's a hermit. He does not accept money. But give him, if you want to give him some money to light candles in the church, he'll do that. So he gave him some money for that purpose. And then the hermit put his hands on his head and started murmuring some prayers in Greek, he said, that I could not understand. And then as we are about to leave, he said to him in Greek, "Ο φίλος σου είναι εντάξει τώρα. Your friend is fine now. He's whole." Well, I thought at the time that the old man was a little bit crazy, but before we entered the next monastery, my memory came back completely. He considered it a miracle, and he decided to spend much of his wealth to build monasteries in the United States. According to the story, that's how a friend came to America. Yes?
What was the name of the book that you mentioned earlier? What was the name of the book that you mentioned earlier on Sensa, when you were talking about that?
You are talking about
Sensa,
Saint Silouan. Saint Silouan the Athonite. There are some books that I universally find them exciting to readers. Saint Silouan the Athonite is one. The other is Wounded by Love, the book about Porphyrios, the one that he himself dictated about himself. It's an unusual book. And another one is Elder Gavrilia, The Ascetics of Love. I mean, if you want to give a gift to people, those books are really powerful. Also, I found the book Father Arseny, another of those powerful books about Orthodoxy. Father Arseny, the Russian who was in the Gulag. So anyway, they came to the United States and they roam around the desert to find land to buy. And at this spot, they heard bells ringing. And the elder said, this is a good sign, that's the place where we'll buy land. But he said, there is no water here. He said, that's okay, we'll buy the land. But the state will not allow us to build anything here because there is no water. We'll bring it from the outside. So they bought the land dirt cheap. And then they went to the state wouldn't give them a license to build. And then the elder said, what if we find water there? He said, well, if you find water, then you can build the monastery. They dug, according to the story, he went in the desert and prayed for 3 days, 3 nights. And then he told them, dig here. They dug and they found a whole lake. And that's how the monastery got started. The property there now is very expensive. So this is what happened there. And that, I took that picture some time ago. So it's like an oasis in the middle of the desert. Next. There it is. Unbelievable. Next. There are pilgrims there and there are visitors. Visitors are expected to be dressed appropriately, cover their heads, and there is a gate there where you can be given this material. And somehow they maintain their isolation. There are controversies that the monastery is very strict, very out of place with the American situation. I hope with time these things will be ironed out, and this can be a kind of the beginning of something that will help. Father Maximus said, these monasteries will bear fruit 30, 40 years from now. The chapel of St. Seraphim Sarov in the monastery, next. And that's Emily says hello to you. She couldn't come. And thank you very much for your attentiveness. If you have any questions, we can continue. That's it.